My name's Stefan Smulovitz. I'm from Vancouver, BC, and I'm an improviser. And this software sprang out for a need for improvising software to transform the laptop into an instrument, not just into a drum machine. So when I started developing this software, that was about 10 years ago, there really was no software out there that was actually able to grab onto sounds, do anything with those loops. There really wasn't anything that was out there that could really be used as a live performance tool. So this has been an iterative process where I keep changing the software slightly, but always practicing with it. And that's a really important distinction, that it's not just code for code's sake. It's actually being developed as an instrument with a body of about 100 musicians that are out there using it. And so constantly, anytime a change is made, I have to make sure that it's not going to radically change the whole instrument and make people alienated, so that it builds, and the experience and the practice you put into the instrument keeps building, and you can keep on developing more and more skills on the instrument instead of having to relearn it from scratch every time I make a change to it. So it's been quite a challenge with it. There's nothing revolutionary with any of the single bits by themselves, but what I think is interesting about this particular instrument is that it's designed as the interface. So it allows you to quickly and grab onto sounds, manipulate those sounds, and interact with other players so that you're not stuck with a certain set of sounds. So I'm just going to load up a sound. So first thing you would do, you could just drag and drop a sound into one of these players here. So this is called the Clang 1 here. There's 6 of these clangs. They're all identical. They're just a basic loop player. So we turn the gain up. Okay, so there we have simple bass line playing. Now, when I first started, one of the things that I was also studying new music, and as an improviser, a lot of people come to improvise music from a jazz background, but I came to it as a viola player. And I wanted to be able to play around and access all those beautiful and great textures that come out of new music. So I was like, okay, how can I do that? For one thing that I love is those great glissandos. So I set a gliss time here. Let's say we set it to 12 seconds. And we tell it to... So we get a perfect now 12-second glissando to the new pitch. The other thing that I started figuring out with some of this here is you get this great ability to go from total noise. So let's say we go up to some ridiculously high speed. We're now in the realm of just complete noise. We bring it back down. You get this perfect glissando and you get this beautiful transition. So I was really interested in how do you make those things happen. And some of those things also, there's a lot of intricacies involved in there. For instance, perception is exponential. So I had to make sure that these glissandos are going to happen on an exponential curve. Because if I don't have that exponential curve, you get it sounding really high, really high, really high, really high, really high, really high, and then all of a sudden it's back down to the normal pitch. So there's a lot of talk about mapping, and that's really one of the most important things, are what variables do you map, which ones are the most important to grab onto those musical characteristics that really let you express yourself. So the other simple things, this beginning and end of the loop point. Now there's a crossfade, if you can see where the mouse is, there's a little X phase, so you can make it a much smoother. Now the other thing that I found when I was working with samples is that the first thing that happens when you're actually using this as an instrument, you have 6 of these, the density builds up really fast. So here, for instance, is one of the first interface things that I came up with was, okay, now I've got 3 seconds of silence. I have a negative crossfade. So right on the fly, without having to resample it, usually you'd have to make a sample with space in it. I can now grab part of the sample and automatically add space to it. So there's these ideas like, how can I, if all of a sudden I'm playing with a bunch of musicians, the noise is really dense, great, and then they all of a sudden go sparse, well, how can I follow that with the laptop? How can I make it a musically expressive instrument? Then I have a simple filter, so you can just, let's take the crossfade off there. So just just being able to transform these little things quite quickly right there on the fly. It's nothing of it is revolutionary, but it's all right there, right in front of you, and you've got all the parameters right there. So that's the, and if you had a live input going, you can record the live input directly into any one of these clangs. Just by hitting the record button, I'll hit it over here. If I hit the live input, I'll probably get a lot of feedback, so I'll just, yeah, so anyhow, you can see that it's recording into the clang right there, and now I've captured it. So oftentimes I'll work with live instrumentalists and be able to grab their sounds and then tweak them and change them and play around with those other sounds. Another influence, obviously, with Xenakis was the granular synth. I have a whole granular synth section here. I'm gonna pull up, I'll just drop the same sound onto the granular synth. So I'll just play back this sound. So you've got your voices, number of voices. You have the duration and the range of duration. So all the grains now are between 40 and 45 milliseconds. The delay is the space between those grains. The pitch allows you to choose a range of pitches. So if we change the range here, we're going to start getting these pitch clouds. Now I added a quantize because this is just chaos. So if I want to, it's a mathematical quantization, but if I do 0.33, I'm only going to get multiples of 0.33. So I'm getting 1.33, 1.66, 2, 2.33. So I'm getting a harmonic series now that's coming out of this granulization of the sound. So you can get some very nice effects, like you can set it at 1 and so now we're getting this nice little kind of pitch cloud. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do was, I'm just going to turn that off for a second. As an improviser, I believe in thinking of it as more of as instant composition. That's what the Dutch call it. There's a great German drummer named Han Bennick, and he calls it instant composition. And once you start setting up a process where you have a sound changing pitch over 60 seconds, or you have this granular synth stuff happening, it allows you to then think of it more compositionally. Instead of actually being like a viola player, gesturally changing each sound right at the moment, or being like a DJ and scratching each sound, you can actually start thinking about setting up compositional ideas that happen over time. Now, one of those things that I set up is there's this value gliss that's kind of, if you can see where the mouse is. So what this value gliss does is if I set it to, say, 60 seconds, that's a very long time. Let's set it to 10 seconds. And we have this granularization happening here. And then I change the duration. It's now going to take 10 seconds, and those grains are going to get longer and longer and longer. And for instance, if I want that pitch cloud to get to go away, I can have it happen over 10 seconds. Now, often, if I would be actually improvising, I wouldn't be using probably 10 seconds. I'd probably be using 60 seconds or something like that. But it allows you to set up a compositional idea on the fly, have that happen, have that process happen over time, and then you go on and you can maybe do something else while it's happening. It keeps the tyranny of the loop from just repeating and repeating and repeating. So you can have these different processes set up on the fly. Now, the other thing that I've got set up here is you see this, here's just it's a basic simple phase vocoder, but as soon as I hit freeze, I now have access to all the sounds that I've played in the last 20 seconds. So this is particularly useful if you have a live input happening, if you're playing with someone else, and they just played something that you really like, it automatically plays it into that buffer, and then you can go back and grab it and freeze it and stretch it, and you can use the phase vocoder to either play through it slowly or just freeze a section. There's this blur on it, so you can also kind of make this nice blurring effect. again, it's just putting an interface on some of the work that Luc Dubois has done and just trying to make it very accessible as an instrument so that you can figure out how to control these things. The other thing I brought is the controller. So to really make it into an instrument, you need to have a physical controller. As soon as you have the physical controller, then the gesture happens and you can get the gesture back in the music. Xenakis, he did the hand-drawn. And while there's not any hand-drawn waveforms here, if you do have your hands on the mixer, you've got the presence of the hand again. And I really think that that's key to computer music, is somewhere that presence of the hand, if it's in the mixing phase or wherever it happens. But if you don't have if you're just thinking about it, it's missing something. And so the presence of the hand, being able to actually, create those gestures, you can't create, there's no other way to do it than with your hands. Drawing waveforms and that kind of stuff, it's just an approximation. So that's really quite revolutionary to have a physical controller. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And so with this software, I've set it up that you can interface it with any MIDI controller, any OSC enabled controller, any kind of controller basically will control any of on all of these values. Now, as a performer, another thing that I thought was useful, and this is where it kind of gets into the little tips and tricks of making it geared towards a performer and as an instrument, I have this global control modifier. Let me just first turn off the freeze here. The global control modifier, so if I have this playing right now, I have a certain, I'm just going to change the gliss time so you hear it responding right away. So I have a range from -1 to 3. So I can go backwards, or I can go 3 times the normal pitch, and that's the full range of this knob. But when you're performing, maybe you want more range than that. All of a sudden you're doing something and you really want to go further. There's this number here, the global control modifier. I can crank it up, and all of a sudden now, it changes the whole range of all of my sliders. So with one number, I've been able to change all of my sliders and change the range of expression that I'm having. So it lets you either be precise or fine. So these are the kinds of things that as a performer, you're using the system and you gotta go, geez, I really wish I could change that number, but I'm not gonna go into the MIDI menu and change all the ranges on all the sliders. So you kind of figure out what kind of systems can I create that allow me to respond quickly to changing situations. I also have, see, there's lots of complexity in here. I've been working on this one instrument for 10 years. So while I've done a few other projects in the meantime, this has been, there's lots of versions of it, a lot of iterations of it, and working with other musicians and getting their feedback, what do they want, and finding new things out of this instrument. One of the main things I put in here was a randomizer. So for instance, if I hit random file impulse, if you look at the 2 files that are loaded, we're going to get 2 new files now. So when I'm working with improvisers and there's a sudden change, the time it goes for me to click and drag and move all these files around, you've lost the moment. You need to have that key command to be able to change everything right on the fly and be able to react to those moments. So that's one way I did it. The other way is if you click on any of these, I've organized my sounds. These are all my bass sounds. I have access to all the bass sounds right there. If I dropped a file of chip sounds, then I have access to all of those right there. So there's a systematic way of being able to quickly find and change those sounds and react to what's happening in a live performance environment. The bassoonerists here. So the bassoonerists, they are they just play back files, but the interesting thing with them is you can either have a single file looping, or you can do a random sequence loop, or you can go through the sequential loop, and basically it'll just play each of those files in sequence, but you can put a random space there. So again, you can think compositionally. While you're improvising, you can have certain things happening, and then all of a sudden, you can have these interjections happening. So you can set up, again, a compositional system that you can interact with, and the other players can interact with. So you can actually set up a stochastic system on the fly. So there we get another one. I just turned that off. All the parameters as well. can be randomized. So for instance, you can change the pitch randomly, you can change the loop widths. So you can have this kind of stuff where it's doing stuff randomly to the sample constantly. So again, you can think compositionally what kind of randomness. You can choose the range. Do I only want the last half of the file being played? Do I want the first half? How large do those jumps happen? All those things can be changed within this stochastic Clang randomizer. So you can actually make that randomness musical. For instance, the pan. Do you want it to pan all the way across randomly, or do you want it to stay on the right side? So you can have one set of samples staying on the right side and the other set of samples staying on the left side. Again, they're all very simplistic but effective systems that you can implement while playing live with other performers, is the idea. It's not a compositional system, it's not a sequencing system, but it's something that all the parameters are there and available so that right away you can interact with other players. Any questions before I go to the, I'm going to show you guys the surround sound version of this now. Is there any other questions? Okay. So obviously another thing that Xenakis was into was spatialization, and this is an 8-channel version of the same software. You can set it up for anywhere from 3 to 8 speakers in any of the standard configurations, 5.1 and anything in between. You can also customize where the speakers are. Just take a little while to load up here. There it comes. So it's identical pretty much to the other version of Kinaxis. I'm just going to, again, I'll just load the same bass sound. So down here is a panner at the bottom here. If you can see the cursor. In the center, it's going to come out of all the speakers. As you go to the corner, it's coming out of just one of the speakers. Now it would be coming out of the back speakers, but obviously since there's no speakers hooked up in the back, we have nothing. The 2 channels can be linked either 90 degrees, 0 degrees, or 180 degrees apart. You can set up spins so that it'll start spinning. So again, just really quick and simple ways to control these things and set them up so you can have things spinning at different tempos and speeds. You choose how many spins and how much time. So if I wanted to spin slower, I would say take 11 seconds to spin once around. In the other version of Kinaxis, there's also a delay that's on all the channels, but in this one, there's an 8-channel delay. And again, the idea is you want this to be, this is for live improv, so there's a delay minimum and a delay range. So what this means is that you could set a different delay time for each of the 8 speakers. So if you're performing live, you don't want all the speakers to have the same delay time. Then you just sound, you get this dud, 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 and it's not very interesting. If you want that kind of sparkle shimmer from each speaker having a separate delay time, you set the range. So instead here, like for the current settings right now, which are down here at the bottom, it would be between 0.3 seconds and 0.7 seconds delay time. So between 300 and 700 milliseconds for each speaker. Each speaker is going to have a different delay time. So this is another way of doing something interesting with the spatialization by having a different delay time on each speaker instead of just doing the panning. There's the 8-channel effects. I've also got the same kind of idea with a resonator and a ring modulator. So you can resonate each speaker with a different frequency. So it's a way of basically emulating having a different kind of speaker, or even more extreme than that. Well, a resonator on each speaker. So you can completely just change how the actual source sounds on each speaker. And the ring modulation, again, you put a range. So again, it's one number that you change and you affect all 8 speakers. You're not going in there tweaking all the different little variables. It's very much set up so you can interact with people. And I'm now going to switch it to the spectral diffusion setting. So now spectral diffusion is something I've just created. It takes the sound using FFT and splits it up into 256 bands, and it then distributes those bands to the 8 speakers. So it takes the sound and takes it from the inside and takes it out. So I'm just going to actually reduce the dry mix to 0. So you can kind of hear now that we're not getting all the frequencies anymore. We're just getting partial of the frequencies, and if you had all 8 speakers together, they would reconstitute the sound and you get all the frequencies back. And then I have, if any of you know the native instrument Spectral Delay, this is basically the same idea. You can set a random delay range. You'll see all these knobs, or the little dots coming up here. That's all the 256 bands. Now you're actually putting a spectral delay, but it's an 8-channel spectral delay. So again, the idea is how to quickly make these kind of shimmering changes over 8 channels while performing live. So that's kind of the idea behind this program. Are there any questions? Yeah?
You thought about touch screens at all? Or is that...
I've used the Touch OSC on the iPod, and that works really well for controlling it. I've also hooked up joystick controlling for the panning, so any USB joystick works. But in terms of actual touch screen interface, I haven't set anything up with that yet.
Because that's going to change your range of motion quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Touch OSC is great because you can, I mean, it's basically a lemur, right? So it's nice to be able to assign all the parameters you want. And again, I have that parameter, that global control modifier is there so that you can change the range of motion. So that maybe if you want it to be really fine, it can be one set of values, and then you can change that one number, and all of a sudden your range is completely different and remapped. It's all about the mapping. So I'm going to quit this really quick, and I just want to show you a peek at another project that I've been doing. Again, this is about finding ways to, it's the interface, it's how to play things, I guess. And so this, instead of playing samples, this is for playing players. So this project here was recently premiered in Vancouver, and it's for a 15-person band. And in front of each person in the band, there's a light box. And that light box, the color meant a certain thing. So this interface here lets you choose. So for instance, if I hit the letter R, it would choose only that letter, and I could choose the letter R to start pulsing green. The idea too is how to use that stochastic. So sorry. So how to use randomness in a musical way? Again, that's another question that's I've come up with in Xenakis and here as well. So for instance, I can use the. Well, I'm just going to select everyone here. So if I'm on the left side of this thing that says long tones, I'm controlling all of them together. And I can make a big fade in and a big fade out. But if I want them to all kind of shiftingly come in and out, fade in and out, if you click on the right side, they're going to fade in and out all independently. And the y-axis is the speed. So if I'm down below here, it's going to be quite slow fade in and fade out. If I click high, it's very quick fade in and fade out. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to do a conduction it's very specific for each player. So I'm going to show you a little video clip of this, and I'll end with that. When I did this project, I controlled the players locally, and then I had Pauline Oliveros in Oslo controlling the players, as well as Lyle Ellis in New York, Paul Cram in Halifax, and John Oswald in Toronto. So each of them were sending the control signals via the internet to the Vancouver, and then via Skype they were able to monitor the changes, but the actual flow of information was just their compositional ideas. And it was quite exciting to see as an audience member, because you could visually see their compositional ideas. So you're able to see how Pauline was thinking about the piece versus John Oswald. He had a very different compositional. So it was actually a visualization of their composition right there before the players. So you got to see both the conductor's visualization and how the players responded to it. So it was a very exciting project. And that also linked in very much with some of the stuff that Xenakis has done with color. So I'll just show you a little clip. It's showing up in the wrong creator type. So you see that each one of those is a pillar in front of a musician with an LED light that's being controlled by the software. Sense of that's Lyle's piece here, a bit more groove oriented. There's John's. It was a very exciting piece to see because it could really get across the composer. Each composer had a very different style, so it's great to see the software be transparent and actually allow the composer's ideas to get across. Thank you very much. Sure.
Maybe I missed something. In the last piece, what is the distinction between you as conductor and
So I didn't hear that.
what's the distinction between you as conductor?
Okay, so I was using the software locally, but then they had a copy of the software. So Pauline was in Oslo using a copy of the software, and then it just sent the data that she was transmitting to Vancouver, and then it controlled the lights. So when she was operating it, it was just Pauline.
And so it is being fed into your...
It was being fed locally into the computer, and then the computer was controlling the lights. Yeah. So it was the same piece of software that worked either locally or via the internet. Yeah. Yeah, just through IP.
Did you have to resist the temptation to grab the controls a couple of times?
Well, actually, to finish the piece, I had a group improv where each of them controlled one section of the orchestra. So I split the orchestra into groups of four or three. And to end that, I did actually have to take over to end the concert. Part of it was actually the Skype connection back. They didn't have the kind of audio fidelity they needed to actually find and edit a proper ending and a proper musical expression. So I had to do that locally. Yeah, but that was the only failing I think was that the quality going back to the conductors. Really, they need to have really good quality audio so they can really tell what they're doing. Thank you.